Namaste and welcome to the Festival of Bharat. This is Divyanshi Sharda, your host. The guest for today's show is somebody who does not really need an introduction, but as we all know, he is Shri Tarek Fatah, who happens to be a Pakistani-Canadian columnist for the Toronto Sun and the author of the book, The Tragic Illusion of an Islamic State. He is a Marxist who has been a vocal critique of Islamism for the past 5 decades. Tarek ji, namaste and welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
We're truly honored to have you here with us.
Oh, so, not at all.
Dhanyawad. So, you are really vocal about the current Israel-Palestine issue that took place very recently. So, regarding the same, you have written a lot about this, you've spoken a lot about this. For our viewers' sake, could you please tell us a bit about the history of this conflict?
Well, it all depends how far back you wish to go. But to sum it up, this is territory or land that was home to the Jews since the time of Moses, and the freeing of the slaves from the pharaohs of Egypt and walking through the Sinai, and references are there to his movement in the Old Testament, which is the Torah, and even in the Quran. Plus, it is a recognized fact that the residents of that area historically were the Jewish people, not as a people who follow Judaism. I'm not talking of religion. I'm simply talking of a people. For example, the Persians are a people, or the Arabs are a people, or the Indians are a people. That is how the Jews are a people who lived in this area, but were as monotheists, were a thorn in the side of the Romans or even the Persians, who at different times invaded the territory and destroyed the temples, and they got scattered around the globe to the extent that some of them sought refuge in southern India as well. Where near Cochin there is still a synagogue to their name. They elsewhere in Mumbai or in Karachi or even in Peshawar, which is northwest area, they were known as, the Mumbai Karachi people are known as the Bani Israel. And then there were Jews even living in the northwestern territories of India, in Peshawar, which is now in Pakistan, who were driven there after the Russian Revolution or during the Second World War. So they were scattered around the world, but there has always been a Jewish population in that area. Now, as far as historically is concerned, this is their territory, just as the territory of Persia is for Persians, or Arabia is for the Arabs. However, in the year 636, I'm trying to cut it short, that's the first time that the Arabs invade this place. And our Muslims are quite proud of the fact that the second caliph, that is Umar, or Hazrat Umar as we say, led an army and occupied those territories, and on top of the Jewish temple built a ramshackle mosque, a wooden structure that would later be referred to as Masjid al-Aqsa, because there are references of what Muslims believe is the flight of Prophet Muhammad to the skies, and they say the steed or the horse on which he was stopped over in Masjid al-Aqsa. But the masjid that they call Masjid al-Aqsa was built much later. So it's a convenient connecting of facts to make that place holy for Muslims as well. For Jews, it is their homeland. For Christians, it is the place where Jesus was born and walked, and Jesus himself was a Jew and persecuted by the Romans. And that is where the Old Testament and the New Testament come in. But the historical claim by Arabs that this is our territory, which foreign Jews came to settle in, needs to be taken with a bit of salt. It is a fact that those who are today known as Palestinians, and at that time were Arabs of that area. The word Palestine was in the 20s and 30s associated with how Jews around the world used to refer to this place. Palestine, the letter P, does not even have an occurrence in the Arabic language. Palestine is the word that was used, but it came into usage much later. At the time when India was partitioned, British India was partitioned, there's a place called British Palestine, which was carved out of the Turkish Caliphate, during which time the Turks colonized the Arabs, and at that time, they were, as Muslim Khalifas, were in charge of Jerusalem, but never shifted their capital over there, never recognized it as such. And if you go back even to the times of the Prophet, he, in fact, in the middle of a prayer, turned his back on Jerusalem and said that the Muslim holy place is Mecca. And he turned, prior to that, he would lead the Muslims in prayer towards Jerusalem. And that ended that period. Now, those are the historical facts that cannot be denied, which many Muslims do deny. But even if both sides are true, the fact is that Israel as a state and Arabs as a people, or the PLO as an organization, have an agreement signed in Oslo, under which both sides agreed to a two-state solution in the territories that were lost by Jordan to Israel during the 1967 war. Prior to that, all this area had no Jewish settlements. There was no residents. There was, no counterclaim, and there could have been a Palestinian state if the Jordanians or the Egyptians wanted Gaza and the West Bank to be one. It didn't happen, and once Egyptians recognized Israel with establishing diplomatic relations, the whole concept of a conflict between the Arab world and Israel, in my opinion, came to an end. The main protagonists in this war were the Egyptian army, primarily the main force of the Arab world, versus Israel. And the 67 war, in 48, about 10 armies from the Arab world attacked Israel because the United Nations divided British Palestine, which had already been divided by giving Jordan as a separate country because they needed a place for the kings of Mecca because they had no land. The Saudis had taken over that place. This might all sound very confusing to you or your listeners, but Transjordan was a country drawn out on a piece of paper. Jordan is just a river, it's not a country. Similarly, Lebanon was not a country. It was carved out of Syria, or Bilad Sham, as the name of that country is. And these were drawn out on a piece of paper between the foreign ministers of Britain and France and after the First World War, and designated as independent countries. So Palestine, Greater Palestine or British Palestine had already been divided, with one part being called Jordan, which even today has 90% of its population is Palestinian. But after the 67 war, the Egyptians sought peace with Israel, as did the Jordanians. And the war on those two fronts finished. There has never been a clash between these two. And just to put a context to your listeners, the biggest massacre of Palestinians has never been done by Israel, but it has been done by a gentleman called Brigadier Ziaul Haq, who then happened to be later Pakistan's ruler, who hanged Prime Minister Bhutto and then became the introduced the whole notion of the Islamic State within the whole world. So the main killing ever that has happened by the Jordanian army led by a Pakistani general and a Pakistan Air Force, killing 20,000 Palestinian, what called freedom fighters. So when people become sanctimonious about, oh, our solidarity is with the Palestinians, the Pakistanis should be the last people who should talk about it. India has always had historically good relations with the Arab world and has stood by the Arab world, but they've never really cut off their relationships with Israel. There is an Indian population, the Bani Israel, who live in cities. It's a tiny country. If you go there, you can go from one end of the border to the sea in probably half an hour. It's not, from an Indian context, it is not even Noida. It's very tiny. So that's the background, and the Palestinians today have a right to a state of their own, not because of any historical wrongdoing that has happened. And if it has happened because the Arabs lost the wars, attacked a new state. If they had followed the 1948 partition, Palestine or the Arab areas of British Palestine would have been a thriving state, with their own port. Jerusalem would have been a UN governed territory with no occupation by anyone. But they refused and they attacked Israel. As Israel, on its part, accepted the partition, but were attacked. And so subsequently, Israel became much larger than the UN had sanctioned it to be. Now, we can't first condemn the UN declaration division and then claim that we want it exactly the way it was. I'll take it if I win and I'll take it if I lose does not apply in the real politics of the world. So today, the answer would be the creation of a Palestinian state on the West Bank. I would say even a three-state solution, because Gaza is a completely different culture that has evolved out of the massive killing by Hamas of the Palestinian administration's officials over there. So today, the government of the Palestinians is based in Ramallah under Abu Mazen, who was elected for 5 years and is now in his 15th year in power. And all their representatives after the election were killed by Hamas, not by Israelis. So these three entities, my understanding is that Gaza has reason to be an independent state on its own. And West Bank can certainly be in the territories that are controlled by the Israelis. I really believe that the settlements should not be built anymore. And where they've constructed the wall, they should declare the border and finish the conflict. You can't keep on fighting and losing a war, getting your own people killed, and then use that method as the basis of a future action. Your leadership must be pretty rotten to think that, oh, this is the way that we will get freedom, by killing our own people or getting our people killed. It's not going to happen. The Israelis have no place to go. The Arabs have, 22 countries. One would argue there should be one Arab country. You can't have tiny little spots here and there with 500,000 people fighting to their death in Yemen, and then talk about that the Israelis are the enemy. You are your own enemy when you kill your own people. In Syria, 500,000 people have died where Muslims have been fighting each other. Muslim Arabs have been killing Muslim Arabs. So no one from outside is going to come to help you cure from your madness if you say this madness is a sign of our intellect. So to sum it up, that's not necessarily or entirely exactly how one could table it, but for your listeners, this would be a fair idea. Now, what I'm saying is would be rejected outrightly by perhaps not the Arabs, but the Muslims in India and the Muslims in Pakistan, who have their own constructs because they deny their own identity. You see, they live in the Indian subcontinent, which is Hindustan, but they deny that fact that they're Hindustanis by adhering to the culture or the naming conventions that come from overseas. अशोक नाम का तो नहीं मुसलमान मिलता है ना, तो उसी तरह पड़े हुए सबके सब. So there is an identity crisis within the subcontinent, Indian subcontinent Muslims as to who they are. And when they look at Palestine, they find everything as a part of their own victimhood, but they can't see that victimhood when they look at China, which has put a million Muslims in concentration camps. Or they do not look at Muslims in Bangladesh when Pakistan killed 3 million in 71, or what the Pakistanis are doing in Balochistan today. So for them, when a Muslim kills a fellow Muslim, that's okay. You know, they, in their mind, when they killed the grandson of the Prophet, well, so what? They're even fighting over that in Yemen today. But other people, based on any set of rules, dare not criticize the idiotic nature of our struggle or say that you're doing something seriously wrong. You need to come to some understanding that this is the 21st century, not the 12th. And we just claim that, well, it's a question of shifting digits. You have 2, 1, and we have 1, 2. And since 1 and 2 are in series, therefore we must be right. I don't want to be dismissive, but we are in bad shape as a community, as a Muslim community. Whereas I'm talking the subcontinent Muslims, whereas if you go to Indonesia, if you go to Turkey, they have their own interests first. They are first Turks or Persians or Javanese or Mindanaoans or, Albanians or Chechens. But when we come to this part, where despite 1,000 years of plundering and ruling, the majority population is still Hindu. So that hasn't yet gone over well in the psyche of those who believe that our duty is to make the entire world come under Islamic rule.
Very true, sir. I mean, the way you have encapsulated this entire mindset is quite impressive because it really speaks.
It's not impressive, it's very depressive.
No, sir. That is also true. You are right on that. I mean, it is very saddening to see how we have become so disconnected with our Muslim brothers and sisters in our own country, and how there is such a big gap between our ideological leanings, something which we are trying our best to bridge, at least in our own efforts and in our own ways. So, sir, with regards to the way you have so wonderfully described the Israel-Palestine situation, and then you spoke about how India is in somewhat a similar situation with regards to the identity crisis that the Muslim population is suffering. So in which other ways do you feel that India's situation is similar to Israel? Because a lot of people seem to think that it is.
I don't think so. Indians have never been kicked out of their own land, ever. India has, it's the oldest civilization on earth. everybody has come to take it over, and like quicksand, they get sucked into India. I mean, I still have relatives who are Anglo-Indians, you know. They came here. My grandmother was French. They came, they became Indian. Everyone came to India to become Indian, except that when the British wanted to mess up with India, they created a Pakistan by making Mr. Jinnah, who was a member of parliament from Mumbai, to represent people with whom he couldn't even speak, which is Bengal and Punjab. So India cannot be compared. India has never suffered an expulsion of its people into another land. There are issues of theories about the Aryan invasion. Fine, all the Aryans, whether I believe it or not, are living with the same. They eat the same biryani. They eat the same chutney and aloo chole, whatever. I said, they're all part of us. I mean, the Zoroastrians can eat the food that we eat, but the place where they come from, which is Persia, people can't handle even a bit of green chilies. So our ancient culture embraces everyone into one large pool of diversity. We've got 29 states, 400 languages. Every Hindu has their own god, and there are still so many to spare. But in the middle of it, you come and say, there is only one, therefore I will burn down Nalanda University. And then people have the audacity to say, well, Bakhtiyar Khilji was a very wise man. He burned down a university, for crying out loud. He has no place in India's history. So what is unique about India is the lack of bitterness towards, or the lack of obliviousness to what happened. So you still have Lodi Gardens. Nobody can have Lodi Gardens if they were even slightly conscious of the atrocities committed by Lodi. You have Aurangzeb and Aurangabad and Hyderabad and all that, by people who came to kill us. We can think about Tipu Sultan as an Indian guy who fought the British, but he too was obsessed with pan-Islamism. This smarter guy, of a later age, took aid from the French to fight the British. Hats off to him. But then he had this obsession of going south and creating an Islamic empire there. This notion of wherever a Muslim goes to change it into Islamic lands is an obsession that has on the east of Delhi, you have a different form, where a place like Bengal has no borders with any other Muslim country. It is unique in that way, but everywhere else they're connected to each other, and they progressively go. And the largest Muslim country today is Indonesia. And they don't seem to have any problem with the Hindu ancestry and the culture. They have Garuda Airlines, and they have Lord Ganesh on the currency note. I keep repeating this. The president of Indonesia's grandson, name is Narendra. You can't have that. But now, at least in Saudi Arabia, they are teaching Ramayana and Mahabharata in the school system. But you can't do it in Pakistan, where these events, Kurukshetra is right there in Punjab. You cut it off and say that's Haryana. No, but it's the same place. The same 5 rivers are coming together. It happened over there, but you will find not a single Pakistani who knows anything about that, because they are imbibed in an identity crisis, which puts them as taking pride in those who invaded their country, which was by any chance Hindustan, from Kandahar, those are all Buddhist lands, Indian, even Peshawar's name was different. They are not conscious of their identity at all. So that is why they cling to something that is Palestine. But if you tell them, what about the Uyghurs? Oh, वो तो पैसे देते हैं हमको, तो हम उनके against तो नहीं बोल सकते. It has come down to that level of immorality. You're openly saying that if you give us money, we'll be silent. We won't say a thing. You can keep killing our people. But those people over there, we find it pleasurable that we can take out a procession, ride horses with 8th century swords. And if you've seen those videos of Karachi women on horseback with spears running to fight Israel.
My God.
So, क्या करेंगे? ये बदनसीबी है. I've never ever seen Indian Muslims protest outside the Chinese embassy. Whereas 1 million Muslims in concentration camps, everyone in the world is horrified.
Very true. Very true, sir. And this is actually, like you said, this is really saddening because this hypocrisy within the Islamic community is...
This hypocrisy is even in the Hindu community.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try to rise as the
high no. Oh no, not at all.
You have Lodi Gardens. Muslims didn't call it Lodi Gardens. You said, oh, that is Lodi Gardens. Oh, yeah, I love this spelling. Let's put Ashoka inside the garden. We can't call it Ashoka Road or Lodi inside somewhere. We reverse it. For us, Lodi is bigger than Ashoka. So, ऐसा नहीं है कि this common gene of being idiots or not having courage or not having a spine and lying is shared. All Pakistanis are descendants of Hindus. I don't know of any army that came with female soldiers. So everyone who was born had a Hindu mother. Even Akbar, even Aurangzeb, everyone had a Hindu mother. Oh, no. We have no Hindu blood. It's clearly saying I was born irrespective that I was in the womb of a Hindu mother for 9 months. No, it had no effect on me. You need an awakening in which hate is out of the equation. Now that's the difficult part. You can't become rabid and become exactly like your enemy. You have to rise to a level and say, this Lodi Road is gone. Ayodhya has been built. Court case, ladna hai, lado. Babur was never born, never died here. Get the hell out of here. उसमें भी लोग डरे बैठे थे. अरे यार, मुसलमान का दिल वो टूट जाएगा. कैसे टूटेगा? Every mosque in India, you curse Hindus every Friday. You pray that, Ya Allah, Musalman ko qawm kafirin pe fatah naseeb kar. What does that mean? You're praying in India with government subsidized mosques, praying for the defeat of those who do not believe in Islam. At least you can go knock on the door and say, भाई ये क्या बोला तुमने?
वो तो हम बोलेंगे नहीं क्योंकि as you said.
नहीं, फिर राइट ना करें.
हाँ जी.
आप गांधी जी की तरह जाएं, लुंगी पहन के आराम से खड़े हो जाए सामने, बोले बताओ, पीट देना मुझे. लेकिन ये समझाओ तो सही कि you just prayed for my destruction and then you're asking for funds for your madrasas. Who taught you all this nonsense? And what are these madrasas doing when Islam was completed, when the Prophet died? when the Quran was completed, it was compiled. There are other questions to it. But why is there something called Barelvi and Deobandi, which create Taliban? The Deobandis created the Taliban, and the Barelvis created this Labbaik Hussain, Rasulullah, that party, Pakistan. Yeah, the ones who hold these big conferences in Dhaka with close to 1 million people swaying their heads around. Even in Allahabad and all these places, this is taking place. You can't knock any sense in their head. Any Muslim who raises something about it, he's destined to be killed.
Yes.
The fatwas, so people like our governor in Kerala would just be quiet, for his own life. There's so many brilliant Muslims in India, like the Maulana Wahiduddin, who recently passed away. Like tons and tons. They have no space. They can't say anything. If you're ugly and if you are wearing that definition of Bade Bhai ka kurta, Chote Bhai ka pajama, then you get straight to the Prime Minister's house, a meeting officially with all the officials. Everyone's bowing to you. If you're just a normal guy, 30-year-old, you're partying in Mumbai, nobody's going to say, oh, that's a Muslim leader. No. In your idea, a Muslim leader should at least appear ugly and stupid and dress up weirdly. Because that looks like an authentic Muslim. This guy, I'm not ugly enough to be considered authentic. This is how the world has seen. No scientist is referred to. You wouldn't go to Professor Parvez Woodboy and talk of him as no. He's an MIT scientist. But had he been ugly and worn his bedroom attire to the United Nations Council like the dim Imran Khan did, then he would say he's a Muslim leader. अपने bedroom के कपड़ों को national dress बना दिया. I never saw this. I lived there 30 years. Who wears the shalwar kameez to the United Nations Security Council? This is what we wear when we go to bed. And then they wear a Western jacket over it. Have you noticed that? Which comes up to slightly above the kameez. If kurta shalwar pehen dete, I would accept it. Yeah, Westerners की कमीज ऊपर टाई का कॉलर और नीचे शलवार और कमीज बाहर निकली हुई. अरे भाई, you'll never find an Arab dressed in half Western and half Arab clothes. You won't find Iranians. Ayatollahs will wear what Ayatollahs wear. We are the only people who dress up somewhere midway. Pajama, jacket, two people. It's like putting your baseball hat at the back.
Yes.
Oh God, help us. आपकी वजह से फतवा मुझ पे लग जाएगा.
नहीं जी, हम ये पार्ट पब्लिश नहीं करेंगे.
अरे नहीं, कर दीजिए थोड़ी सी मिर्ची है. I'm 71 now. कोई ले भी गया मुझे तो क्या कर लेगा.
Nah, please don't say that, sir. We would definitely not let anything like that happen. So it's not like that. Thank you. But it was, yes, very enlightening. So thank you so much for that. So if I were to continue and ask you a related question regarding India's approach to anti-terrorism in its own country. So do you think that India is doing enough to curb Islamism?
I don't think so, because of the same reason as I said earlier on, that if you feel that the Muslim vote bank will go elsewhere, that 10 to 15% can have drastic effects in certain constituencies. You've seen that in West Bengal, where Mamta ji's party members had green topis and green flags. So it was a good use of the Muslim population to its effect. Who's going to stand up against terrorism? If you cannot identify terrorism in its current form worldwide and equate it to, sir, कि वो तो America ने भी bombing की थी, तो आप उस पे नहीं बोले थे. You know what aboutism tires me? When your belief system says that the destruction of Hindustan is your destiny, which we call Ghazwa Hind, and the end of times will not begin until India and Hinduism and Hindu temples are destroyed. If this is your belief and your life, you genuinely believe begins after you die, when you go to paradise or heaven and the world comes to an end, that is what you aspire to. The nature of our way of considering what is life is very linear as compared to, say, the Hindus or the maybe perhaps even the Jain of, cyclical events of the Atma being where it is. We view it from a very different construct, so we don't know how to tackle extremism. Muslim extremism must be tackled by Muslim leadership. When a non-Muslim takes on that leadership, he becomes George Bush. The idiot bombed Iraq because Pakistan-based terrorists attacked 9/11, committed 9/11. Sochiye na. That means there was nobody around. We're saying, sir, all of them were Saudis, all trained by bin Laden, who lives in Pakistan. No. Let's go to Iraq and bomb the crap out of them and make them all extremists. So what was the product? You created ISIS over there. Who thought that Al-Qaeda was very bad? Now you have in Mozambique, a place like Mozambique having ISIS terrorists. India did something very early on, which still hasn't been put into effect, is the definition of terrorism. India has never identified Pakistan as a state sponsor of terrorism. That should be the first thing India should do. This is a state sponsor of terrorism. We want to place sanctions on it. The world doesn't want to do it. Let them go. But you commit any offense against Bharat on your borders through people you send over here, or the propaganda that you have, or how you kill people who are pro-India, or you kill the Hindus and convert the Christians or send them to China as sex workers. All of that is not becoming of a state, but if it is a state policy and it is India's neighbor, and India is a rising world power, then India needs to first clean up its shores. Just abhi Sri Lanka ke beaches pe all that plastic has ended up. Pakistan is similarly contamination that is lying on the western side of India. It will, as long as the thought that we are going to come back as Mughal emperors is not erased from the psyche, not the genuine thought. If you love Babur, you are the enemy of India. If Aurangzeb is the greatest thing you ever thought about, and every Pakistani wants to be Aurangzeb, then what does India think? The worst man who ruled India is a hero for Pakistanis. Ye itna 600, 700, 800 years say this hostility is there. That needs to be cleansed, and that will only, in India, it can only be reflected if Indian Muslims have Indian names. Indian Muslims have Arab names. They don't have their own names. Koi bhi nahi hai. So Turks have their own names. You don't find Abdullah naam ka koi Turk ho. You have Erdogan, that is, no Arab can pronounce it. Iranians have their own name. Indonesians have their own name. Why is it that subcontinent Muslims need to have Arab names? वो कर ले ठीक है, लेकिन 100%. It shows you the level of contempt you have for the land on which you live. Lahore is not something. Lahore is only temporarily out of the reach of Indian civilization. Na? राम के बेटे के नाम पे शहर रखा, उस पे मुसलमान बैठ के आके, this is our city. अरे भाई मक्का जाके लो, लाहौर पे कब्जा कर लिया. And there's no Hindu living in Lahore. Every Indian city has about 10 to 15% Muslim population. You go to any city in Pakistan, you will, if you put up a sign, reward, I want to meet a Hindu in Karachi. In the next 1 week, there will be nobody there. Sabko maar diya. Or you need to have trade talks. Now, Francois Gautier has written something about this. He said, what is needed is a spine. ये well-mannered लखनऊ स्टाइल का लीडरशिप के आदाब कैसे हैं आप, हुजूर कुछ अशार सुना दीजिए ना. We can't get it out of here. So India is not taking care of the terrorist threat, nor is it conscious of how to do it.
Very true, sir. And we should definitely get a more proactive approach, because hopefully things are changing for the better slowly. But we should definitely accelerate the process by great amounts, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so a question that probably many of our viewers might be having in mind with regards to you specifically would be your personal experience with Islam, Hindus, and India. So when exactly in the point of time in your life did you realize that whatever you have been told about India and Hindus is in fact not the truth by the state of Pakistan? When did this realization dawn upon you?
I was quite young. I think the 1965 war, just after that, when as a 15-year-old, I would hear that angels are descending from heaven, and when the Indians bomb Pakistan, the angels catch the bomb and drop it in the river Ravi. And I said, that doesn't look, that's not credible. We used to get the Times of India. I had just started college September 1st, 1965. And in the college library is where we would get the Times of India. And at that time, the Pakistani infiltrators had already gotten into Indian administered Kashmir and what was called Operation Gibraltar. So I would go first thing in the morning to read what had happened, because it gave you the other side of the story. And then on the day of the war, 6th September, the newspapers stopped. And we suddenly, I personally felt that I was caught in a situation where I had only one thing to hear. So we used to get Akashvani and Doordarshan, at that time shortwave radio. That was considered an act of traitorship if you're listening to that. So it was more out of curiosity. And I had lived most of my child life in an area where almost 100% of the residents were immigrants who had come from UP and Bihar and Hyderabad and Bhopal, the Urdu-speaking Pakistani. And I realized that they were more hostile to India than the people of, say, Sindh, who were the actual residents of Karachi. So it just makes you think 2-3 times, what's the reality? Thank goodness for the British Council that had a huge library, and including the American Information Service Center. Kya tha naam? Anyway, they had huge libraries in Karachi. After college, I started visiting these libraries, and I started reading up. And you won't believe it, the first serious book I read was my father's edition of Savarkar's 1857 War of Independence. I didn't know anything that this was a controversial figure or what he was, but it was in my dad's library. He was a reader and a good student of history, but very, very anti-Indian after he migrated from Mumbai. I still have his full-page article against India written in a newspaper in Karachi. But that gave me a consciousness that we were actually Indians. So, and the fact that Jinnah couldn't speak any Pakistani language was incredible. And then the first thought that made me feel that there's something rotten about this is how the people of West Pakistan would treat the people of East Pakistan, which is today Bangladesh. Mm-hmm. They were politically far ahead of us. And our interaction between them, because the country had interwing scholarships, and a lot of Bangladeshi students used to study in Karachi University or lived amongst us. That triggered different. Then there was, left-wing organizations, the student wing of the Communist Party of Pakistan, which was the NSF, National Students Federation. Those are the people who made me aware that this is utter nonsense, angels don't come to as anti-aircraft fire. So one looked at war and the invasions and plundering of India from a different sense. Once you understand that Pakistanis had infiltrated Jammu and Kashmir, and the entire population was lied. And not only that, the operation was called Gibraltar, mm-hmm. which, as you know, is the mispronounced word for Jabal al-Tariq. These are when, in the year the Muslims invaded India and Sindh, they also invaded Gibraltar, Spain, and collected under the rock, which the leader was Tariq ibn Ziyad. He was a Berber general. So Gibraltar means the invasion of Spain. So here you had the Pakistan army infiltrating India under the guise of Kashmiri freedom fighters. Mm-hmm. And that title was not Kashmir or anything about India, but Gibraltar. You suddenly realize that even in your own mementos that you're creating with other people, you're borrowing from. Then it came to understand that my parents had named me Tarek, which, by the way, later on I found out is a Sanskrit word, but that's different. But my younger brother was Mahmud from Mahmud Ghazni. So the whole system of approaching India and the non-Muslim world as places that our armies would go and plunder is horrifying. And if you're wondering where it's one of the words, Tara jo hota hai, usse hai ye. It's one of the few Sanskrit words that goes into Arabic. The early morning star. Tara, Sitara, Tarek, they all come from India. तो लोग मुझे कहते हैं नाम बदलने, मैंने कहा मैं बदनसीब का तो नाम ही है संस्कृति तरक से है तो वरना कर देता मैं बदल चले तो should we, is that all, or should we?
Sir, I thought you were completing the sentence.
No,
Yes,
no,
definitely.
my thoughts are random always.
That's a wonderful story. So I had no clue that your name actually is a Sanskrit derivation. That's beautiful.
तरक से है ना, थोड़ा और रिसर्च करिए.
No.
हाँ,
Thank you so much for saying that. Hanji. So, sir, another very interesting question that pops up into my mind, at least, is that we generally find in the West nowadays that there is a kind of a nexus between the left, the Western left, and the Islamic coalition. So, why is this exactly taking place? What connection does the Western left have with the Islamic right, that is?
It's anti-Americanism primarily. So if you notice that when the Shah of Iran was overthrown and the mullahs came to power, those were the first mistakes made by the left around the world, that they supported the overthrow of the Shah, which was fine, of course. But the fight against the dictatorship of the Shah of Iran was fronted by the multiple levels of communist and socialist parties in Iran. But Tudeh, which was the CPI in Iran, had close relationships at that time with the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union dictated many of the policies that were conducted by many of the communist parties, whether it was in Angola, or whether it was in Sukarno's time, or whether it was the CPI, and then the further division between CPI and CPM. So this sort of a direction taken by Tudeh to support the overthrow, and for Air France to fly in Ayatollah Khomeini to take over that, was a strategic mistake for which the whole world is paying a price even now, and most of all the Iranian people. Their revolution to bring democracy and freedom to the people became the first time that an entire country was put in a cage and told that you will be whipped and killed if you step out of the bounds. And that is what Iran is till today. And at that time, just to give you an example, the CPI supported the steps of the Iranian Revolution. Many of us were happy that the Shah had gone, but we knew that what was coming was horrendous, because 79 is also the year when Ziaul Haq enters. 79 is also the year when Nur Muhammad Taraki of Afghanistan is killed in his bedroom by Hafizullah Amin by putting a pillow over him. And three major events took place that triggered in 1979 the climax of the Cold War. And so if Islamists were fighting America, the left had to support them, because they themselves had been weakened by the lack of liberty or individual rights in the Soviet Union or China or wherever there was. If you were a dissident, you were finished. Whether you were Sharansky or whether you were Solzhenitsyn, you had to escape from there. So the place that promised equality of human beings and free thinking by the Bolshevik Revolution suddenly became concentration camp under Stalin. And so you could not have independent thinking. Societies that do not allow independent thinking rot and die. That is why you are a 10,000-year-old civilization, so you have 50,000 gods, you know. सब चलेंगे, जिसका जो मर्जी आए करे. हमारा भी 1000 साल हुआ, बोला बस एक है, और किसी ने बोला तो ऐसा मारेंगे उसको ठीक हो जाएगा. But anyway, so the left today is no longer the left after the end of the Cold War. Now you only have millionaires who are Marxist. You will never find working class people fighting for causes that were taken up by the left. Now you have politically correct Arundhati Roy types and philosophically green movement by Greta, or what was that singer Rihanna. Everyone's become left who has nothing to offer, like a vice president in the United States. She just laughs every time you ask a serious question. She hid the fact she was Hindu for so many years and wanted to be known as black. And then her black father said, I'm not going to come to your oath-taking ceremony. You're a fraud. You're not aware of that.
I'm not.
She just had to eat idli, and all the Indians voted for her. So left say, ye nikal raha hamara. You don't have people who, who are dedicated in a practical way to effect change. Kanhaiya Kumar has to continue to remain a student to be on the left, right? There is no place where he can then move on, because the parties have become redundant. They cannot offer the solution. If state-sponsored pricing and bank, they have to, the left had to have an exercise in their thinking what went wrong. How did an idiot like Ziaul Haq pull the carpet from under their feet and topple the Soviet Union? Of course, the crisis in Chernobyl and the nuclear crisis, that is what really led to the Soviets having to run away from Afghanistan, because the entire country's entire GDP was being spent to stop a nuclear reactor from exploding. Millions of tons of cement had to be poured over there. All this happened during the same time. The left, unfortunately, is caught in either the rigor of textbook communism, not understanding the context within Marx understood society's economics as the basis of forming history, of how people progress, what are the means of production and all that. And if you really want to have social justice, then you find it in Finland, where you get 3 years of maternity leave, or you can have 30-year-old prime ministers, or in Norway, or most of the Scandinavian countries who are social democrat as against socialist, because they eliminated any sense that dissent will be punished.
Yes,
At its greatest glory in Islam, dissent was represented by the gentleman who screamed out in Baghdad, "Ana al-Haq, I am the truth." And the Caliph said that you can change this, but he refused, and he was beheaded and his head rolled down the river. And those are turning points, that when you get killed because of what you think. So in Pakistan, they go to the homes of journalists and beat them up and tell them, it's Citti girlfriend ke bhai ne mara isko. This happened just day before yesterday. You will never get a progressive thing when you subjugate people into fear of authority. Everyone has the right to go on his or her own salt march. And no one has a right to stop anyone from thinking or asking questions. The left today has joined with the Islamists. I call this phenomena Sharia Bolshevism. Everywhere you find the leftists, even in Toronto where I live, I cannot differentiate their stands between Jamaat-e-Islami or the Communist Party. They're the same. They're seen at the same places. Their only goal is death to America. And if Khomeini says death to America, they're with Khomeini. ये वजह है. Otherwise, किताब कम छपती हैं, ऑथर ज्यादा हो गए हैं. And what's the fun in reading a book if you can chat on the iPhone, you know? मजा तो उसमें है ना. So we've made newspapers die. We are making any intellectual discourse unfashionable. Not many people are going to watch this show. बोर कर दिया, अभी लगाओ कौन बनेगा क्या है आपका शो वो
करोड़पति.
Between that and this, who's gonna watch?
Don't worry, sir. There'll be plenty of people to watch you speak.
हम करोड़पति नहीं बन सकते, हमको इतना गारंटी है. If you do in thinking and if you try to critique, not criticize, why is it? Why do young girls in the Indian subcontinent not have the right to fall in love? I'm serious. The whole world, that's the greatest thing that happens when you see an 18, 20-year-old with a boyfriend. इधर तो बोले छोटे भाई को साथ भेज देते कि देखो किधर गई थी, लेके आओ वापस घर पे आ रहे. Is this what we have evolved? Look at history, look at a sculpture, look at a views of sexuality, and then we adopted from the Muslims the ghungat. You can't even understand whether the woman is coming towards you or going away. बुरके में आँख तो दिखती है, घूंघट पे कैस पर तो गोश्त चला जा रहा है. ये सब सॉल्व करना है, बिलीव मी. ये ओनरशिप वो विमेन ये इंडिया में भी है. कहाँ तक जाएगी, शाम को कितने बजे आएगी. एक कॉन्सेप्ट है, खराब लड़की खराब हो गई, इससे क्या इंजन, इससे मोटरसाइकिल खराब हो गई. लड़का खराब होता ही नहीं है, लड़कियां खराब हो जाती है. You need to have a hammer, हर एक के सर पे 3 दफा ठोकना चाहिए. और फिर हो भी जाती है तो सांस आती है साथ. Curse never ends in our part of the world. And what sort of children will be born? Same out of fear, out of this, out of that. इसका ये करो, उसका वो करो, खाना पकाओ उसके लिए, इसके लिए आज किचन से निकल जाओ तुम्हारी है. Come on. We are better than that. Just the sculptures tell us we are better than that.
Very true, sir. Very wonderfully said. And I mean, really, sir, talking to you, if I were to tell you something very personally, I would say that my entire family is such a big fan of you. Really.
ये तरीके से बच्ची को खराब कर दिया. मोटरसाइकिल फिर से जाके ट्यून करा. Someone told me ये बेटियां खराब हो जाती. मैंने क्या इनके के स्पार्क प्लग खराब हो जाते हैं, इनका क्या चीज खराब होती है कि ठीक खराब. कि जब बच्चियां आजाद होंगी तब हिंदुस्तान आजाद होगा. उस वक्त तक कुछ नहीं होता. उस वक्त पे चाचा ताए बैठे होते हैं, उनका पी रहे होते हैं, गालियां दे रहे होते हैं. हो जाएगा, ठीक हो जाएगा. हाँ, one day it will be. हमारी उम्र में तो नहीं हुआ तो ऊपर से देखेंगे फिर क्या हो रहा है भैया नीचे. You get a bird's eye view.
So sweet, sir. धन्यवाद, sir. It was honestly very, very illuminating, very educated speaking to you. It was truly an honor from our end. धन्यवाद for joining us. We're truly obliged to have you on our show. धन्यवाद and pranam.
You take care. Khuda Hafiz. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Khuda Hafiz.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Citti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.